receive. So to receive can be described as staying with the grace of God in dependence and receptivity. Practically what it means is we're quiet and we spend time, and even in prayer, we're not necessarily talking to the Lord, but we're in a place of waiting on Him, that we're waiting to receive His love. The thoughts and feelings, desires that we acknowledge and that we talk to God about, they can draw us to God, and oftentimes in those thoughts that may arise during that time of quiet, they can be God Himself. They can be His voice. That's where discernment spirits will come in later on. But receive ultimately is, you could say, is the easiest and the hardest at the same time of these habits in prayer. All right, it's the easiest because you don't do it. You don't do it. God does it. So it's up to Him. You know, the most we do is we have to put ourselves in that presence and wait on Him. And that's why it's the hardest. Because we don't want to do that. We don't want to wait on Him. The silence can sometimes be deafening, because then we have to face ourselves. And what if we actually meet Him? Oh my. What would that be like to actually, if we actually met Him? But we wait and we can ask, how is God loving me right now? But then when we give Him space, right? Just like any human relationship that you have, there's a time to speak to the other person, and there's a time to listen to the other person, right? If all we're doing in prayer is we're just speaking to God the entire time, and we never give Him a chance to give a word in edgewise, and then we wonder why He doesn't ever talk to us. It's like, well, have I given Him an opportunity? Have I given that time of quiet? And most importantly is that interior quiet, because for some of us, even when everything is quiet around us, our brains are still going on a mile a minute, and it's very noisy inside. Quiet on the outside definitely helps us for when we struggle with quiet on the inside, which is why we need that exterior silence often. But yes, how is God? God is always, He's at work. Even before you begin to pray, He's at work, right? He's already starting. He's pursuing you before you ever start pursuing Him. So if we make ourselves available, He will break through in His time and His way. The Father desires ultimately to only give His consoling love. He allows us to experience other things in our interior life, the desolations. But He only desires to bring us consoling love. Even though we won't at every single moment in prayer always experience them. And He has His reasons, and that'll come more in discernment of spirit stuff. But so to practice this is both the easiest and the hardest. Another quote from Father Trainer here: "It is difficult for us to believe that living in dependence on and receptivity to God is especially pleasing to Him. We would much rather do something great for God to earn His love. But that's not our faith. We don't earn His love, right? So it is very pleasing for you in a sense, it pleases Him very much when you in a sense do nothing, right? You might think, but I have to do this, and I have to do this, and I have to do this. It's actually more pleasing when you stop. That's the Martha and Mary thing, right? Martha, you're worried about so many things. There's only need one thing. One thing. Sit at my feet, right? He's very pleased when we spend time and we do that, more so than when we make ourselves busy with all the other good things that we're doing. So waiting in silence to speak. We need that silence. Be still and know that I am God, Psalm 46 says. By waiting and by calm, you shall be saved. In quiet and in trust shall be your strength. It's from Isaiah 30. Silence, I mentioned already, amplifies those interior movements within our own heart. And silence plus that honesty and talking to Jesus, relating to Him about what's going on, that's what brings up this whole possibility of experiencing God's presence and His response, right? Because when we allow ourselves that vulnerability to be that honest in our prayer and talk to Jesus about that, now suddenly you've freed up a space for Him now to enter and to be able to respond and speak. So, and it's a choice to cultivate silence, you know, instead of filling all the in-between times in our day with noisy things like television and phone and surfing the internet. You know, we can choose instead at that moment silence. So that's the next part on here is the receive part. And for this entire part, we're just going to have some silence instead of talking together in the group. And as part of the silence, you know, having spoken, and you may return to the relating, you know, a moment, relate to the Lord, and then just in silence to listen for him. Invite him. Jesus, I'm here listening. Speak, Lord, your servant is listening. There's limitation when sometimes we need longer times of silence just so that our hearts are open enough to receive, right? So I know that cutting it this kind of short, we're getting closer to the end of our time. So, but cutting it short doesn't give us enough time to be able to receive. We may not hear God's voice immediately upon entering the silence. Sometimes it takes a while for our hearts to quiet down enough to hear his voice, which is oftentimes why, you know, when we have retreats, they're designed over several days because we need to wean ourselves off of the noise that's in our hearts so that we can hear God's voice in the silence. And that's why consistency in prayer is so important. You know, if we're building up that habit day after day after day, consistency in our daily prayer, then our hearts are going to be more apt to be able to hear his voice when we do enter silence. So consistency is very important. If you don't feel like in prayer anything's happening, sometimes people think that there must be something wrong with me. But that's not true. That's okay. Prayer doesn't always produce wonderful feelings, doesn't always produce deep spiritual consolations. You know, just like any human relationship, there's you know, sometimes you have real big highs and you really feel like you love each other, and other moments, you know, just kind of normal everyday life. It's just the normal things that's happening. And that's where a lot of what's happening in prayer too. You know, what's important is that we trust the truth that God is with me, that he is loving me, even if I can't sense it in any kind of external feelings or any way. A great analogy that St. Francis of de Sales uses is he says, "What number of courtiers appear 100 times at court without any hope of a word from their king, but merely to pay their homage and be seen of him? Just so, we ought to enter upon mental prayer purely to fulfill our duty and testify to our loyalty. If it pleases God's divine majesty to speak to us and discourse in our hearts by his holy inspirations and inward consolations, it's doubtless a great honor and very sweet to our soul. But if he does not vouchsafe such favors, but makes it as though he saw us not, as though we were not in his presence, nevertheless we must not quit it. But on the contrary, we must remain calmly and devoutly before him, and he is certain to accept our patient waiting and give heed to our perseverance, so that another time he will impart to us his consolations, and let us taste all the sweetness of holy meditation. But even if it were not so, let us, my child, be satisfied with the privilege of being in his presence and seen by him." All right. So this is what happens in prayer. We come into the court of the great King of the universe, right? And some days it may please him to come forth with deep consolations for us to experience. In other days, it's simply that we are there awaiting in his presence. And so even if nothing happens within our prayer, we finish by thanking him for that time, and we return the next time. And he may grace us with who knows what beautiful gifts. But it's that consistency, regardless of whether we feel like something's happening or not.